5 to 10 years, basically, you're going to have to know how to do everything. That's how it is right now. You need to know how to do everything: audio, video. You need to know how to report, take photos. They've been telling us for so many years that you need to do that, but I don't think the curriculum hasn't really changed that much, you know. So I think we're going to see a change in the curriculum at schools and preparing journalists to really know, journalism students, how to get out there and be able to do everything, because you really need to know how to do that. If you don't do it, you're not going to find a job.
I originally was a journalism major, and I hated it because what they focused on was a lot of schmoozing and a lot of ways, teaching you how to maintain the status quo, basically. At this point, I'm a historian, I'm a sociologist, I do cultural studies, theology, and what I think would be a better way to approach journalism education is for kind of the way they do education now. You don't major in education anymore, you major in a subject, and then you learn the skills to educate people. So I think that journalism kind of needs to go that way, where you major in a subject and then you learn the skills to journalize your subject, or to make your subject into a journalistic endeavor, or to write newsworthy pieces about that subject. And I think we would see a lot more quality come into journalism if it was approached in that way.
The proliferation of the kind of punditry that's going on in the US right now, I find that very disturbing. So I see it's possible, if journalism continues the way it's going, the negative, pessimistic view is that more and more like investigative journalism like The Nation does, or The Progressive, all those other independent publications, I see that being lost as more and more people come in who just give the talking points. Even liberal pundits who I respect their opinions, like Keith Olbermann and Rachel Maddow, they aren't able, and they really don't do the type of investigative journalism that I find necessary for a democracy. So even though I respect them, I think if that's all we have, we lose something. And if we keep on losing investigative journalism, that type of journalism, which requires the resources, as I said in the panel, if that's lost and all we have is these opinions thrown back and forth, I think we're just going to have sort of a media that just sort of shouts at one another and doesn't actually do any sort of critical thinking and critical analysis of politicians, of policies, of culture, and of themselves.
I think it's really important that people take chances and try new things with the knowledge that there may be failure if they take on a new challenge. I think we'll see a lot of things that make use of new technologies, different ways to use the internet. I think what we're not going to see is a lot of print media, or a lot of new print media coming up in the next 5 or 10 years. I think things like the Kindle and the iPod, other sort of technologies like that, I think will be really instrumental in the way journalism is distributed in the future. And I think the internet will really become even more prominent as a way for people to get news.
I think the positive worldview is that there are people who realize the problem of losing investigative journalism, and there are people who want to save it, politicians included in that. And I've heard some good models for ways of trying to save it. Eric Alterman wrote a column for The Nation magazine a while back that's stuck with me. It says we don't necessarily need to save the newspaper, but we need to save the news, the way of getting and disseminating news. So I'm not sure that the newspaper as a medium can be saved as such, because the internet, it's not going to go away, nor should it. And I think the way the internet is impacting society, newspapers, as the format they've existed in the past, are going to be phased out. But I do think that the way of gathering the news can be saved. And so the newspapers, if they're smart, I think will try to modify themselves so that they take on sort of a new shape.
People are willing to spend large amounts of money on video. People go to movies, people rent movies, people spend huge amounts of money on cable, on TiVo. This is how people like to enjoy media. Even on blogs, even what Nico Pitney is doing at the Huffington Post, aggregating YouTube clips from Iran, even with the text, even with all the other content they have, people still want the video. And I think that when investigative journalists realize this and start to get it, that if they incorporate video into their journalism, they're going to realize that there's a funding structure then, because people are willing to pay for it.
I hope that the media is going to continue to diversify, that people of color and people who represent other ideas that are not quote unquote mainstream, well basically that what mainstream is will change. That people who don't represent the majority will be a part of that so-called mainstream as opposed to being put into ethnic media or this type of media or that type of media, that media itself will see the necessity to diversify and that everyone will kind of be in one conglomerate as opposed to having all these separate categories.